Hi, welcome to Research Methods, Chapter 5. We're talking about ethics today. So, fun chapter. All right, let me get to it. All right, so understanding research ethics. Right and wrong. And in the middle, we've got ethics. There are a number of ethical issues students may encounter as part of the research process. Okay, so we're going to talk about those today. First is plagiarism. This is not only a problem that we see in research, but this is just a problem in writing we see in general. I don't know what they're teaching you guys in high school anymore. It drives me crazy. You guys get here and it's basically, hey, copy and paste things. That doesn't work, okay? So copy and pasting doesn't work. Presenting any type of intellectual property as your own does not work. And you can't just copy and paste and say, this is where I got it. That doesn't work, okay? So we're gonna talk about how we can avoid that, because there are some, it's not only unethical, but it's also illegal. And in schools, a lot of times the first time you do it, you get, like a 0 on your paper, which, for sometimes that can be detrimental to your career, especially if you have to have a really high GPA to move on in your program. The second thing is if it happens again, or even in some institutions, one time is enough, they will dismiss you from the institution, so you're kicked out of school, okay? And again, it's not something you can just be ignorant from, say, I didn't know that I was committing plagiarism, all right? Usually at all institutions, whether they give you a big long spiel on it, or they just, in something you sign, there's like a little tiny, the little tiny words at the bottom say something about plagiarism. That's all it takes. Okay, so whether you read it or not, that's all it takes. All right, so we're going to talk about that to make sure it doesn't happen. All right, so here's how we avoid it. Okay, keep track of which references are associated with which ideas. Right. Now, one of the things you got to watch, and they're going to talk about this on this page, is the common knowledge. All right. I want you to already get in mind, especially in science, there's no such thing as common knowledge. In science, you really got to understand, especially in exercise science, somebody came up with something at some point. And even though it might be common, like, hypertrophy rep range is 8 to 12, most people put, dumbbell versus barbell, you're going to have to use more stabilization and things like that. You might be like, hey, this is everybody in the gym knows that. Well, that's fine, but somebody came up with it. And if somebody came up with it, and they, especially if they did it in some type of research capacity where they proved it, you better find it and you better put that in there. Okay, so let's dismiss the thought of common knowledge, especially in science, because somebody came up with something, and that's why everybody commonly knows what it is. But if it's in a research paper somewhere, you better reference it, okay? So keep track of the references that are associated with which ideas and concepts when you're taking notes or otherwise storing information to be used somewhere else, okay? Select the words you use in your own writing, okay? Such as something advocated by the authors of a published paper is not presented as your own thought, okay? So again, you've got to, if you are reading a paper and you're like, oh yeah, I want to use that part of something that's in a research journal, you got to rewrite it in your own words, okay? And again, you can't present it as it's your own. Not only do you have to restate it in your own words, but you're going to have to cite it. Okay, so again, a lot of people think, well, if I cite something, can I just like put quotation marks around and direct quote? No, you can't do that. We don't do that in science. You rewrite it, and so that's both a changing the way the sentence was written, and reusing, using similar words that basically want to get across the same idea, but it's got to be in your words. And unfortunately, if the way somebody wrote something originally is the way that you would write it, too bad. You've still got to rewrite it in a different way. And you've got to cite it that it came from them, not your own idea, okay? So you got to change both keywords and sentence structure without it changing the meaning of what's being said, okay? Because that's the thing too. It's kind of weird because you're not quoting, but you definitely don't want to misquote somebody either, all right? So it's got to make sure that you got to make sure that it gets the point across that the original point was getting across, all right? Improves writing styles as compared to directly quoting. Again, we don't directly quote in scientific stuff. You know, I mean, I get you may go through an English class and the instructor's like, oh yeah, you can quote this, you can quote that, that's fine, but you're now, you know, step it up a level. Welcome to science. We don't quote. The only time we put quotes in there, they're like super famous quotes that we're going to put at the beginning of some presentation to, you know, say to kind of make a point. So you've noticed at the beginning of a lot of these slides that the authors of this book put quotes in. Again, it's not they're not quotes, you know, like I remember one of the earlier chapters in something about standing on the shoulders of giants, because they're trying to make a point that, you know, when you do research, there's many folks that came before you. So whatever you did, even if it's like super amazing, you came up with the cure for cancer, there's folks that led you to that point, you know, and you got to realize that you have to acknowledge those folks that came before you. Okay? And that's really what they're saying with that particular quote. We wouldn't put something like that in the research paper unless you wanted to make a point of that at the end, like, hey, because of this, we did this, and now, yeah, we came up with this particular drug or whatever else it is, and now we have a cure for cancer. You know, and you want to throw it in your conclusion to say, you know, is some type of homage. That might be a little bit different, but we don't particularly use those in science, okay? And then you have to cite the original source of the content, unless it's common knowledge, which, like I said, in science, we really don't have much that's just common knowledge. Somebody came up with it somewhere, so you better find where that was, and you better throw it in there. I don't care if the citation's from 1952, you better cite it, okay? All right, so check your understandings, go back through here, make sure you understood everything I went through, you know, where you cite stuff. And again, we cite pretty much everything in our field, okay? Almost every sentence or every other sentence better be cited, because you know, anytime you state some idea, it's probably not yours, okay? Until you get to your hypothesis and what you're doing, okay? All right, data outliers. They're defined as measurement or observation that's way out of line with the rest of the data set. Okay, so it can result from an error in data collection, a bug in the software, or a participant who markedly differs from the others, right? So you can have them for all kinds of reasons, okay? You can have somebody that, you know, like during the course of the study figures out what's going on. And so then they go, oh, okay, so I know what this is. So they start doing things that people normally wouldn't do under those circumstances, and they start getting these either incredibly like high scores or low scores or whatever it is that are way far away from what everybody else is doing, okay? We'll talk about how we handle that, okay? So you got to carefully evaluate them first, and then you can discard them only if you can show that it's purely erroneous, that is not representative of what's going on. But if you do discard it, you can't just like sweep it, you know, like, oh, it's gone, sweep it under the rug. You better bring it up in there like, hey, we found this happened. We had a data collection error. We had a software error. We had a participant that decided to goof off, you know, whatever it is, you know, they, you know, decided not to participate and they didn't tell us, and they started doing, you know, they started taking like these supplements, you know, when we told them not to be taking anything, and so on and so forth, whatever it is. Okay, you got to address why you're discarding it. Okay, now, if it's legitimate and it's something that maybe it's an outlier, but it's one of those outliers that could happen, you know, you don't know why it happened, so you can't trace it back to somebody was goofing off or messing with you. You don't see any erroneous data. It's just like, man, this just happened. you gotta keep it. Okay, so even if it's like, you got all your little data points all right in here, you got this guy over here, sorry, gotta keep him, gotta keep her, right? It may kind of skew things to one side or the other, but that's just how it is, right? HIPAA, right? So the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act regulates the way in which protected health information can be stored and utilized, allows legal access of PHI for research with signed participant authorization. Now, if you sign that you'll allow yourself to be, used for research under the protected health information, all people are going to get from you are going to be things like male, like it might be like male, 28 years old, maybe your race, and whatever the health information is, right? They don't know it's you. And maybe like the area of which it was found. So, like maybe South Florida or something like that. Okay. They don't get to know who it is. But, so if I was doing research, I could say, hey, I need all your research on folks that have, say celiac disease. I'm looking at some study with gluten and celiac disease, and I need a count of folks that have come into hospitals, in the last like 5 years that have celiac disease, right? So if you sign something saying, yeah, you can use, like my stuff for research, I'm not going to know who you are. I'm just going to have some information like, like I said, age, gender, race, that you have it, and maybe some signs and symptoms of folks that are going through it, maybe I'm wondering like how people usually identify that they have it. When do they come in with identifying markers? Just wondering if people tend to have the same symptoms when they come in for that, right? Or if some people come in earlier with certain symptoms, other people come in where it's like it's gotten really, really bad and they have other symptoms, those type of things, right? So it disallows use of personal non-public information such as social security numbers, so on and so forth. And, like it can't identify. So it's like, it says, oh yeah, this lady Susan has it, or this guy Bob has it, something along those lines. Again, should all outliers be discarded? No. Why or why not? And, understand what HIPAA is, PHI, and PNPI. Okay. Institutional review boards. Okay, the IRB, you'll hear people talk about the IRB a lot in research. That's what they're talking about. They must evaluate and approve all research proposals involving human participants before data can be collected. Okay, and again, even if you're just taking information like we talked about, like you're not actually doing any experiments on people, but you're just taking data that related to people. So again, even if I'm calling the hospital and saying, hey, let me know about all your celiac patients, or how many folks are coming in with obesity that have these other comorbidities with it, something along those lines. I've got to get IRB approval before I even approach to get that information. Okay. Mandated by the Code of Federal Regulations administered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, requires training of all researchers, faculty, students, staff, anybody that's going to participate. You've got to get CD certified or city certified. It's CITI. Okay. And again, depending on what type of research you're doing and everything, there's different certifications that you get. Okay. Federal-based criteria for approval of research proposals. Risks to the participants are minimized by using procedures which are consistent with sound research design, which do not unnecessarily expose participants to risk. Now, again, you may be doing research with weightlifting, or folks are doing some type of jumping or some type of other athletic maneuvers. There's always inherent risk to that. But again, you want to minimize that as much as possible. And again, there's certain things that are just inherent risk, right? So if somebody's doing something with, like a soccer ball, they're going to do some soccer maneuver, and we're looking at some type of biomechanical changes between doing this soccer maneuver versus this soccer maneuver, this football move versus this football move. There are some inherent risks that just could happen, right? Like you twist your knee or ankle or something along those lines, just because of the nature of those sports and nature of those moves. Now, again, is that unnecessary or is it necessary? Well, if you're trying to do research that pertains to football players or soccer players, and we're trying to wonder what mechanisms would be best, like say we're trying to determine, is it best to do this move versus this move from a risk standpoint or from a health standpoint to protect from injury, you know, probably not. It's probably not it's probably not an unnecessary risk, because again, if people are already doing both these things, and we're thinking, look, some players choose to do this, some players choose to do this. Is one of them better for them? That's important to understand. Therefore, we're not asking them to do something that they wouldn't normally do. It's not an unnecessary risk. It's something that already happens. Risks to participants are reasonable in relation to the anticipated benefit. So again, the anticipated benefit is what if there's two moves that, soccer players or like say running backs do to get a player away from them. They're both moves where you make a move to your left or a move to your right or something like that. And they're similar moves, but one of them has a component where the knee bends more or doesn't bend, something along those lines. Okay. So the anticipated benefit is if we find that one of those particular moves is less likely to injure an athlete, that's a huge benefit, because if we realize, hey, both of them have the same amount of success. So say they both have equal success rates in juking the defender, but one of them has a much higher success rate when it comes to reducing the risk of injury. That's a huge benefit. And especially if those participants in our study play soccer, play football or basketball, whatever it is, that's a huge benefit, and if we can then say, look, we need to teach this move versus this move, or, say in football, it's a tackling thing, hey, this is typically how people tackle now, but what if we taught them to tackle like this? And this type of tackling looks like it's going to reduce the risk of head injuries and neck injuries by 50% or 70%. That's huge benefits, right? Okay. So again, anticipated benefits, if any, to participants, and the importance of the knowledge that may reasonably be expected to result. So again, the knowledge of those things all would be very beneficial to athletes, right? Selection of the participants is equitable, right? You want to make sure that you've got the right participants and the right skew of different participants within the groups for what you're doing, right? So again, if we're doing soccer maneuvers, we want soccer players and we want them within certain age range and probably maybe even a certain skill set, right? We don't want to take like 5-year-olds that are just learning the game that maybe aren't up to par with doing those kind of moves and asking them to do those things, right? And again, more than likely, we'd probably start with 18 on up, adults first. Then we would look at, is there a difference? Maybe we want to know the difference in injuries between maybe some younger players or something, or some older players, whatever it is, and then we'd go from there, right? And then again, we don't want to have in one group highly skilled athletes and the other group less skilled athletes. So we're not going to, have for soccer, we're not going to have Ronaldo and Neymar and Messi and all these guys in one group, and then we've got a bunch of like college kids from FIU in another group, and say, well, all right, this is equally matched, right? Not going to work, even though they might be around the same age or something along those lines. These guys are much higher skilled, so we're going to, mix it up where we got professional and collegiate in both groups, and have a good mix of both in both groups. Okay, so these guys do one maneuver, these guys do the other maneuver, and we'll measure the data. Okay. An informed consent will be sought from each prospective participant or the participant's legally authorized representative. So again, if you were doing research on those younger than 18 years of age, they're considered, they're not considered adults. Their parents are going to have to sign off. Or say you're doing research on, say Down syndrome athletes or something like that. They're going to have an informed consent from their caregivers or anything like that. Anybody that may be considered like a population at risk that has to have a caregiver, their legal authorization representative is going to have to sign that. Risk to benefit ratio, items 1 and 2. Any known or potential risks incurred by participants by virtue of participation in studies should not outweigh the benefits for the participation for those participants. So again, you don't want to have folks doing something where the risks are higher than the benefits, right? It's not gonna, you're not gonna get that. Okay, the IRB is gonna look at that and say, oh, the risks outweigh the benefits. Okay. You know, we're not letting people do muscle biopsies on folks where, you know, the risk that the tissue won't, you know, you're going to have some type of issues from that for the rest of your life, or you have a scar or whatever else, and those things just for the knowledge is not worth it, right? So, you know, whatever it is, they'll say, no, can't do it. Okay? A single serious risk is not likely to be outweighed by any number of perceived benefits. Again, you know, it's just as long as the benefits outweigh the risks, then you should be okay. And known or potential risk participants are taken very seriously, and if such risks cannot be well managed, a proposed study is not likely to be approved by the IRB. Okay? So if you can't manage the risk, you can't, you know, control them to some extent, then it's just not going to happen. Okay? IRB is not going to let it fly, even if the information that would come from it would be very beneficial. Okay? So how do you select them? Okay, participant population needs to be selected because it gives the most appropriate population for participation. So again, we're not going to select just random folks come do a soccer study if they've never played soccer or basketball or football or whatever it is. Now we want them to be representative of who we're looking at. Okay, so we're not going to look at like, you know, something to do with women's soccer injuries of the knee with men that play, you know, rugby or something along those lines, or men that don't play sports, or women that don't play, you know, it doesn't make any sense, right? So they gotta, one, they've gotta be a good representation of the population, okay? And then unfortunate case in the past have involved prisoners for use of medical experiments, not because they were especially appropriate as participants, but because they had no ability to object to what they were subjected to. Okay, so again, there's studies that have happened in the past. Those of you that might be familiar how we figured out penicillin in the Tuskegee experiments that happened. They used to take African American males, and then they exposed them to syphilis, and they gave some of the participants penicillin to see if it helped, which it did, and then the other participants, they just basically gave them syphilis and didn't do anything to help them. Those are the type of things that have happened in the past, and it's the reason the IRB, you know, some people think, man, the IRB's, you know, so tough and a stickler to things. That's why we've done things in the past, you know, that have been, you know, immoral, unethical, and, you know, put people at risk in, you know, ridiculous situations, you know, and so the IRB was designed to protect participants from risks that they shouldn't be exposed to. Okay. So again, federally based criteria for approval of research proposals. 1, informed consent will be appropriately documented. And again, the informed consent needs to be worded in a way that the person doing it understands what they're doing. Okay, and they're consenting to it. It's not one of these weird legal documents where you're like, look, this is just how it has to be written. I know you're buying a home or whatever it is, and I know you don't understand, but this is just what it is. Sign it. You're going to understand what you're doing. Okay? And if you don't, the researcher's got to explain certain sections that they have written there, but it should be written in a way that you understand what's going on. At least you're part of what you're being exposed to and what you're doing. Okay. The research plan makes adequate provisions for monitoring the data collection to ensure the safety of participants. All right. So again, you want to monitor data collected and ensure that all the participants that are having their data collected are safe. You know, you're controlling the environment to the best of your ability. Right. And there's adequate provision to protect the privacy of the participants, maintain confidentiality. So again, if there's a lot of people that are working on the research, you know, when somebody takes somebody in, there should maybe be only one person that knows the identity of folks, and then they code them. All right, everybody else just knows that participant as participant 15 or participant AJ 137 or whatever it is. Everybody else is, you know, they're code, you know, as far as they know, they're just coded. When they bring in their paperwork, they're like, oh, you're A14 or you're B27, right? And that's all they know them as. Okay, so check your understanding on that. Informed consent means that each participant is fully informed about what they will be expected to do if participating in a study, and be fully informed and gives his or her consent to participate. U.S. Code of Federal Regulations identifies the elements of an informed consent. And again, your informed consent, when you're trying to get IRB approval, you're going to send it to them, and they'll tell you whether or not it's up to par. Okay, your whole experiment might be fine, but your informed consent isn't up to par, right? So they will double check that as well. Okay. Elements of the informed consent. The following information shall be provided to each participant: a statement that the study involves research, an explanation of the purpose of the research, and the expected duration of the participants. Again, you may not always know exactly how long something's going to take, but you're going to say, you know, this thing, we expect the fastest folks to do this in about 30 minutes. Those that need more time, it's going to take them about an hour and a half. You know, you're ballparking, but it better be a very scientific ballpark figure. And you may get those ideas from you going through and doing it, and you do it as fast as you can, and then you try to do it as slow as possible and try to get that. Or you know, some of the other researchers may do like a little bit of a pilot study type of thing to figure all that out. Okay. A description of the procedures to be followed, and identification of any procedures which are experimental. Okay, so you're going to tell them everything that's going to be going on. Okay, they may be part of a placebo group. They may be part of a group that actually gets some type of ergogenic aid or some type of drug or whatever else. They will know. Okay, now they won't know which group they're in when they're doing it, because you're trying to hide which group's in the placebo, but they know they would be in one of two groups or one of three groups. Okay. A description of any reasonable foreseeable risks or discomforts to the participants. So again, you may tell them, hey, we're an exercise study. You may get hot and sweaty. Your muscles may ache and burn. You may, you know, there's a possibility if you get too tired, you could drop away. You know, you go through all that. You know, again, you could say, hey, we're going to have spotters. So again, you know, as long as you're participating well and you communicate with this, more than like, you know, like, most people don't hurt themselves doing this. Usually that happens when there's not good communication. So, you know, we'll tell you what we expect you to do, and we'll tell you what our experimenters and spotters and everybody else are expected to do, and try to minimize those risks. Okay. And description of any benefits to the participant or to the others, which may reasonably be expected from the research. So you're doing some exercise experiment, you know, benefits may be like, you're going to lose body fat, you're going to get ripped, and you're going to get like bigger muscles swollen. You know, I'm sorry, it's just going to happen. I know nobody would like to have that happen, but you know, just, yeah, really. So again, the benefits are you may come out of this thing looking like a freaking beast. Okay, that's awesome. All right. All information again shall be provided to each participant. Statement describing the procedures by which confidentiality of records identifying participant will be maintained. So again, when you come in, we'll put you into a little, you know, computer database, but we're going to give you a number. From there on out, the stuff that actually has your information in it, or again, we may not even put your name into the computer. You're going to sign a form, and on that form we're going to give you a number from there, so we'll have a file with your name and your private information. Everything that everybody else sees just says A46 on it, right? So everybody that has access to your stuff, all they know you as is A46. They don't know anything else about you. All the file and everything that's going to have your information, we'll put it in a filing cabinet. It'll be locked. Nobody can get into it. And the only reason we have that in there is so that we can show that you did the informed consent if anybody comes and asks, right? So for research involving more than minimal risk, an explanation as to whether any compensation, an explanation as to whether any medical treatments are available if injured. So again, if you're doing some type of like really physical stuff, you may have a doctor on staff, or, you know, hey, we've got a medical center here at the campus and you'll have full access if anything happens to go in and get treated, so on and so forth. Okay. And again, if they get treatment, what does that consist of, and where further information may be obtained if they need it about how all that would go down. Okay. Other things that'll be provided: an explanation of whom to contact for answers to pertinent questions about the research and research participants' rights. So again, you know, you may have like one or two main researchers on there. They'll give their information, like here's their email, there's a phone number you can reach them at. These are the folks. If you have any questions, please, you know, direct your stuff to these folks, you know, to these two people, okay, or this one person, okay. Statement that participation is voluntary. Refusal to participate will involve no penalty or loss of benefit to which the participant is otherwise entitled. So again, if at any reason they drop out, you can't penalize them. You know, if you have say you give them money to be in the research, you can say, look, those that make it a quarter of the way get this much. If you make it halfway, you get this much. If you make 3/4, you get this much. If you make it to the end, you get this much, right? So if they make it 3/4 and you're like, man, we really want you to go to the end because your stuff, you know, like what's going on with you is going to be interesting. They're just like, no, absolutely not. Whatever you promised them to that point, you got to give them whatever that benefit is or benefits, okay? And they can discontinue participation at any time for any reason they want without penalty or loss, right? It just it is what it is. Anticipated circumstances in which the participant's participation may be terminated by the investigator without regard to the participant's consent. So again, you may have to, you know, say somebody starts to develop some type of health issue along the time that you're studying them, and that health issue was a disqualifying factor why you excluded people in the get-go. You can kick them out. You know, you can say, look, you know, with the stuff we're doing, this now puts you at a greater physical risk. We can't have you in the study, you know. And so again, you also have the right to refusal in those type of regards, right? And the approximate number of participants involved in the study. So again, you'll have to tell them, look, there's about 50 of you. There's about 20 of you. There's going to be about like 15 in one group, 15 in another group, 15 in like group C or whatever else, all right? Protection of minor participants. Informed consent for minors requires an informed consent form specially designed for a parent or guardian so they understand everything their kid is going to go through. And an assent form for signature by the minor that is written in language appropriate for the minor's age. So the minor's not getting pushed into it by their parents and they absolutely have no idea what's going on, right? So you have a consent form saying, hey, buddy, this is what you're going to do. Mom and dad, you know, are going to sign off for you to do this, but you understand what's going on, and they write it. Yes, I do, and you know, make sure they know what's going on. Okay. You should carefully explain informed consent forms to and offer to answer any questions. So again, don't just hand them to your. Now, I get in some research things, you got so many people coming in and it's like time type of thing. Like, here, you guys go over here, sign these things, bring them back. I got these other folks signing and doing whatever. If you have the ability and the time, you should read through each thing with them is the best way to go about doing it, okay? Protection of animal subjects, guide for the care and use of lab animals, published by the National Academy of Sciences, advocates design and performance of procedures on the basis of relevance to human or animal health, advancement of knowledge, or the good of the society. Use appropriate species, quality, and number of animals. Avoidance or minimization of discomfort, distress, and pain in concert with sound science. Again, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? I mean, you've seen some animal studies, you're like, you can really do that for animals? Again, if the benefits of the knowledge outweigh what they're, you know, like what they're putting the animal through, it'll get approved, okay? And again, use appropriate sedation, analgesia, or anesthetics. Okay? Guide for the care and use of lab animals, published by the National Establishment of Experimental Endpoints. Provision of appropriate animal husbandry, directed and performed by qualified personnel. So you don't just have this researcher that's like, yeah, I think I can do that, doing those things. You have somebody that's actually trained to do it, maybe even licensed to do it, and conductive experimentation on living animals only by or under the close supervision of qualified and experienced persons. Okay. Again, check the understanding. Research papers submitted to journals. Authors normally include only those who were involved in planning the study, interpreting results, and writing the paper. Okay. So again, they're not just, like, hey, buddy, can you throw me in on that paper so I can get some notoriety? They're not supposed to do that. If some folks have done that in the past, they shouldn't have. Okay. So everybody that participated will be included, unless otherwise designated that, look, you're only doing this little bit. We're not going to throw you in as an author or whatever else. Again, that should be arranged prior. But, if you were, planning it, interpreting results, and writing the paper, then yes, you should be listed as an author. And manuscripts should be submitted to only one journal at a time. So again, doesn't mean that you might not end up submitting your manuscript with 3 journals because the first 2 deny publishing it. But you can't just send your manuscript out to like 7 journals and see who bites. Okay, you can't do it that way. All right. And that's it for ethics. Short chapter. You're probably thinking, oh man, we're going to have this long chapter on ethics. I mean, really, it's you know what the right thing is to do. Okay? Don't steal people's work. Make sure everything that you submit to the IRB is on the up and up. Make sure you disclose everything that you're going to do to the IRB, right? Don't be like, I don't know if they're going to approve this. Let's not talk about it. So, no, everything needs to be on the up and up, right? Everybody involved needs to be on the up and up. Everything that you're doing needs to be on the up and up. You are telling them exactly what you're going to do from start to finish. You're not leaving any details out. And if they say that, okay, then you're okay to go for it. All right. So just make sure that you do all those things. Make sure you dot all your I's, cross all your T's. Make sure that you're not breaking HIPAA laws or anything like that. And you're not plagiarizing anything, and you'll be good.